one of the things I always remember about Srila Prabhupada in the early days was how it was like a family. You know, Prabhupada used to get in the van with us. We used to go to these houses and just, sometimes there was just Bangladeshi refuge something, and we'd be sitting in the house eating on the floor with Srila Prabhupada, and we'd get back in the Sankirtan van, and then we'd get back to the temple. Sometimes it was late, and even Prabhupada would ask to cook prasadam. We'd have prasadam. And I always remember also that Srila Prabhupada was always so eager to preach, even when he was sick, even when he was ill. Nothing seemed to stop him. I remember one time where we hadn't arranged any programs because Prabhupada was ill. And we went into Prabhupada's room, and Prabhupada asked, I can't remember who he was asking, whether it was Tamal Krsna or something. He said, why is there no programs? And then we said, well, Prabhupada, because you're sick, Prabhupada. Prabhupada, sick? Prabhupada said, I am like the cow. Wherever you take me, I will give milk. Prabhupada said, do you remember that one? Yes. That was such a nice expression. Another thing I wanted to mention, which was very beautiful about Prabhupada, was he used to give a class in the morning, and then afterwards we used to go up to his room sometimes, and then he'd listen to it on the tape afterwards. Remember that? And I remember one time we were sitting there listening to the tape, and then Prabhupada would stop and he'd say, so what do you think of this point? Isn't it like that? And we discussed the points, and then one devotee was getting bewildered, and he said, Prabhupada, why do you listen to your own tapes? You know, he just said it like in a kind of, and I thought that was a real funny question. And Prabhupada said, because I did not speak them. It was just so wonderful the way he said it. He said, because I did not speak them. Do you remember that, Mara? And I always thought that was an incredible thing. Another thing in relationship to Radharani and Shwara was when Prabhupada would come and greet the deities when he first arrived, there was always some transcendental mellow going on. And I know one time when Prabhupada was speaking, and suddenly he got very emotional. And Prabhupada, like that, he said, I have captured Krishna. He said, I have captured Krishna. Either it was during a class or something, but he said, I'm holding him here for you. He said, I'm holding him, now you please come. You please come and take. Like that. It was I always remember that. And the other thing with the mood of Bury Place was that we used to, of course, always sit outside Prabhupada's room and wait for him to come out whenever he go to the bathroom, and Kula Shikar would always be there, you know. And but the beauty was that Prabhupada was so personal, and every single interest was there. I'll tell you a funny story was that how Prabhupada was almost all pervasive, and that was that in 1970, I think everyone went off to India. You remember that airplane you took? It was you had to start it with a propeller.
36 hours to Bombay.
I met that gentleman who arranged all that. I bumped into him, you know, and he was telling me about how he arranged that flight. So everyone just disappeared. Suddenly the temple was kind of half empty. And Mukunda Maharaj was there. And then all of a sudden Mukunda Maharaj says to me, I'm going off to LA. And I said, well, who's going to take charge? I said, oh, you can be in charge. And I was only 18 at the time. And my parents didn't even know I was a devotee at that time. And I remember I had to go and do a television interview as the head of the Hare Krishna movement. You know? And like, that was the first time my parents ever saw me. I was shaved up and I was the head of the Hare Krishna movement.
There's no one else to massage Prabhupada, and so I was going to do it, and Narayan was going to do it too, but he disappeared. And so I started to prepare and wash myself and everything, and then I came upon Narayan, and he was saying, my hands are too coarse to touch the spiritual master. What am I going to do? Such a fallen soul as this cannot. Like that, he was going through that kind of thing. So I said, you know, just get prepared, you know, and he said, no, I cannot. So I said, okay, I'll do it. So I got there, and Prabhupada said, he said these words, he said, anybody can rub oils. Go out and preach. he was talking about himself as like some inanimate object or something. He said, anybody can rub oils, go out and preach. And then at that point, Narayan came in and said, I'm ready, Srila Prabhupada. And they continued.
One morning I came in and I went up to the door, and the door was a little bit ajar, and I was, for some reason, feeling kind of hesitant and like almost a tremor of fear, like why was this door open? Because this door was never open. So I went up to the door and I pushed it just a little bit to look inside, not knowing what to expect, and I didn't see anything, but I suddenly heard, Malati, come in, come in. It was Srila Prabhupada. He says, come in, we are watching TV. So I went in, and they were watching TV. He said, we're going to watch them land on the moon. So I was supposed to be making breakfast, but I sat down with them, and we watched them land on the moon. And immediately Prabhupada turned it off afterwards, and he said, they did not go. And then he looked at the television and he said, this is an idiot box, and it has made idiots of us. And he indicated. Of course, that statement, they did not go, became quite controversial. There were devotees, including his servant Purushottam, who cited that statement as reasons for their departure from devotional service. They could not accept Prabhupada's statement. And 2 years ago, I found a newspaper in West Virginia. It's not the most enlightened state, but they had a newspaper, and the headline of the newspaper was, they did not go to the moon. And it was written by 2 former NASA scientists. NASA is the space agency that backed this moonshot. And in it, they showed the picture of the moon landing, and they started giving various evidence why they did not go to the moon so that an ordinary person could comprehend it. So, number one, when the spaceship would supposedly come down, because there was dust on the moon, there would have been a huge crater from the force of the landing of the ship. But in this picture, it was completely smooth, very, very nice surface. And there were no footprints from the spaceman. That was one. 2 was the way the shadows were of the spaceman standing there. They were in the wrong direction for the time of day that this picture, so-called, was taken. 3 was, if you looked in the back, you saw this metal apparatus that was holding a light. It was like a stage. And you could see it really clearly. Once you were informed about it, you could actually see there was this stage light holding the light. So like this, they were, just pointing out. And they defined the location as some test site in either Nevada or Arizona, some desert test site. And this is by the scientists. So Srila Prabhupada he needs no vindication, but for those people who doubted, he was certainly vindicated. So now I was always wondering if these people who left because of that statement are back now.
When Srila Prabhupada was living in Mathura for a little while, he was writing, I think, Easy Journey to Other Planets at that time. And he was just very humble, just writing. And one day, this old brahmachari told me this story, that one day they had come late to lunch. They had been out preaching or something. And he and Srila Prabhupada were sitting, eating some leftover prasadam. And up the stairs comes these very rich people from, some visitors or something. They kind of looked around and saw that it was pretty dilapidated, and they just walked back down the stairs. And then he said that Srila Prabhupada turned to him and he said, oh, just look. They are coming up the stairs and all they are seeing is an old man eating a dry chapati. He goes, but they don't know what plans Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has for this old man.
First time I met Prabhupada at 1974, and I went in Terminal Building. I took myself and Bhagavati, we both took a permission. We went inside, and Prabhupada was just last man. Prabhupada last when he was coming out from the plane. And first darshan when I feel just like I met Krishna. And I immediately, from far away, I paid him dandvat to him. And when he came near to me, and first question he asked me whether there is any temple here, Radha Krishna temple. I said, no, Prabhupada, there is no Radha Krishna temple. There are other small temples, but no Radha Krishna temple. So you build one nice temple. In Hindi he said, Badhiya temple. That's what he said first to me. I said, all right, Prabhupada, I'll try it. I'll try to build that. This was his first question. As soon as he came out of plane, then afterward he asked how many people is here and all these things. But first thing he asked me, so I think he talked to me with 20 minutes. He talked with me because he had a short time. Last person he came out, a very short time, and I felt very happy. And then he asked how many Indians here. So other, but first thing he asked me, is there a temple here? And I said, I'll build that temple. So this is the first question. And I had 20 minutes to talk with him. Within 20 minutes, he changed my life. I was a businessman. I was business. I had shops, rice mill, rice mill, and a soap factory. We are 5 brothers. We had a good business here. So he changed me on this way, straight away to Krishna consciousness. Then when he was passing, after talking 20 minutes, then when he was going, I paid dandvat again to him and touched his foot. And as soon as he put in my head, his hand, I feel, I feel shake my whole body, and I thought, oh, all my sins has gone. That's what my feeling was. And Prabhupada said to me, from today you chant 16 rounds Hare Krishna mantra. And from that day I start chanting 16 rounds. He never told me 1 round or 2 rounds, no. He said 16 rounds chant. This is my Prabhupada's first meeting.
I said, yes, Swamiji, I can't sleep. I'm so nervous. I couldn't sleep last night. I couldn't sleep this evening or the evening before. He said, oh. He said, that's good. Then, he was sitting on his bed still, and I was sitting in front of him, and he kind of leaned forward and looked me right in the eye, and he said, actually, our aim is to make sleeping 0, eating 0, defending 0, and sex 0. He said, we don't preach that, but that is the aim. So those were really my first one-on-one, for want of a better expression, instructions.
I do remember that the first real intimate exchange I had with Srila Prabhupada, and pretty much the last one was when my mom sent me a sweater. My mother lives in England, and she sent me this really nice wool sweater. And New Vrindavan was a mud hole. It was, just really dirty, and, it was really hard to keep anything clean. So I looked at this beautiful sweater, and it was like kind of saffron in color. And I said, well, I can't wear this. It's going to be trash in no time. I'll give it to Srila Prabhupada. And so somehow I preserved it in the brahmachari ashram in a plastic bag, kept it from getting dirty for probably a couple of months. And I was always thinking, I can't wait to give this to Srila Prabhupada. And so then Prabhupada came to Boston when they first opened the printing press there. And it was a big occasion, and devotees from a lot of different cities went there, and we got in our panel truck and drove up, everybody from New Vrindavan. And so I'm clutching my sweater and, really looking forward to it. And so we get there, and I'm trying to figure out, well, how do I do this? I'm not one of the high muckety mucks, and they're all, going to be with Prabhupada. And so one evening after Artik, everybody was gathered for darshan, and they had created with a backdrop a separate room behind the temple. And that's where Prabhupada gave darshan. And so I just kind of said, okay, it's now or never, and burst in the middle of all this. And everybody kind of looked, who's this? What's he doing here? And I just sort of stammered, for Prabhupada, I have this sweater my mother gave me, and I want you to have it. And Prabhupada said, oh, no, I can't take it. And he said, your mother gave this to you, you take it, I can't take this. And Prabhupada saw the look on my face. I was crushed, I was just devastated. Oh, God. And so he saw that, and then he says, well, I think I said, oh, but Prabhupada, please, I was begging for my life here. And he was very kind, and he said, all right, well, then we'll exchange. And so he started, he had a sweater with these buttons on it, these big oak buttons. It was really a beautiful sweater. And he started unbuttoning it. It was a cardigan, and he took it off, and I was crying, and the devotees in the room were crying. It was, just like an example of loving exchange, and that, I don't know, it just bonded me so closely to Srila Prabhupada, and of course I'll never forget that, and it kept me going for a lot of years.
We got to the house where Prabhupada was staying. Brahmananda went upstairs, and Prabhupada said, send them up immediately. So he called for us to come up, me and Hari Kripa. So we went up. So there we were, seeing Prabhupada in all his grandeur, He was sitting there, sitting cross-legged. And he had this huge smile on his face, as if someone had just told him a joke or something hilarious. He had this huge smile on his face, and he said, 400 years ago, your ancestors were taken away from here as slaves, like that. Then he made his eyes real big, and he said, but just see how you have returned as masters. So that was, I thought, how poetic, who could say such things like that? Generally if you refer to someone in the black community, if you grew up in a black community about slavery, it's not like a very jovial thing. Anyway, Prabhupada just made it such a wonderful statement that we had returned, in Krishna consciousness. And so then he told them, Brahmananda, to give us prasadam, so then we went to take some prasadam.
At the end of one of the darshans, particularly as far as personal exchange with Prabhupada, I asked a question I didn't know I was going to ask. My hand was all of a sudden up, and he pointed to me. So I had been with a couple of other god sisters, Kayla Lalita and another god sister, maybe 2 or 3. We would take turns cleaning Prabhupada's rooms when he would go on his morning walk. And that was so precious to touch his clothing. And to feel that vibrational presence. So I was thinking, I went on book distribution every day for several months, and book distribution is another kind of touching with Prabhupada, of course. And his presence is just as strong and just as vibrant in the airport or wherever. But this was a special sweetness, a personal touch, you know, by getting to clean his room. So my question was, Prabhupada, you're leaving soon. How do we get more personal association with you? Because that particular type of personal intimacy was very nourishing, you know, and strengthening. So he said, just distribute my books, which was exactly why I wanted more personal association, was so I could have the strength to distribute his books. And Bhaktidas was the temple president at the time, and he said, oh, Prabhupada, that's what she does. She goes on book distribution every day and distributes your books. And he said, then that is very nice. So that was confirmation, you know, complete confirmation in my heart to continue. At the end of one lecture, I decided I would ask a question. And this was after I'd been a devotee for maybe a year or so. And I wanted to, I figured that maybe I could get a little association with my spiritual master by asking a question in class, because I wasn't one of the devotees who regularly had association with Prabhupada. So when he said any questions after the Bhagavatam class, I raised my hand and he called on me, and I was very surprised. In fact, I was shocked. And what I had in mind to ask him about was that I had been thinking that in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says he speaks the Bhagavad Gita many times. So I had a query as to whether the Bhagavad Gita is always spoken by Krishna within the same Leela of Krishna being with Arjuna on the chariot in the battlefield of Kurukshetra. And so that was what I wanted to ask him. But I was right at the back of the temple room, and I knew I wouldn't have much time, and I was very nervous. So all I said was, does Krishna speak the Bhagavad Gita on the hellish planets? And everybody kind of, I don't know, I thought they laughed or something. They thought it was a funny question. But as Srila Prabhupada asked Bhagavan, what did she say? And Bhagavan repeated the question to him. And his answer was, yes, this London is a hellish planet, and Krishna is speaking Bhagavad Gita here. So at first, I have to say, I was, because I had a big false ego, I felt kind of disappointed because I didn't get the answer to what I really wanted to know. But it was such a valuable instruction, as everything Prabhupada says is so valuable. And over the years, I got so much out of it, because later on I read at the end of the Bhagavad Gita where Sanjay says that by the mercy of my spiritual master, Srila Vasudev, I have been able to hear the Bhagavad Gita directly from the mouth of Lord Krishna, and because of this I'm feeling ecstasy. And in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that we can only hear directly from Krishna by the mercy of the spiritual master, and that whenever we hear from the spiritual master Bhagavad Gita, we are hearing directly from Krishna. So everybody, we're all hearing directly from Krishna by the mercy of Srila Prabhupada. Yeah. And also another thing instruction and I got from that was that I was thinking London was such a great place, you know, cultural, nice place to be. Prabhupada was telling me that actually this is hellish, you know. This is a hellish place.
But the last day he concluded with a few more heavy statements. He said that the whole British Empire was built on thievery. He explained that the British came to India, they stole things from India, they took the soldiers from India. When they achieved that, then they went to other places in the world to conquer. And so he was explaining that as soon as India became independent, then the whole British Empire started to collapse. It was an interesting observation and statement, but it was so true. That as soon as India became independent, then the whole British Empire started to collapse. And then he said because of all the atrocities that they did in India, they will become beggars. And then he said one more thing, which was also quite interesting. He said, do you know, you have seen the camels in India? He said, they're walking like this, but they also have their head high in the air, with their nose in the air. He said that the camels, the British Raj took their next birth as camels in India, which was amusing, but it was also quite a heavy statement.
I remember one lecture in particular. Afterwards, he was answering questions, and he'd been talking about prasadam. So one of the devotees was asking Prabhupada, Prabhupada, is it true that if you take prasadam even once, that you're guaranteed a human birth? And Prabhupada said yes, and all the devotees started, hooray, just thinking, wow, we've got it made. We got a human birth, and that's all you have to think about. And but Prabhupada didn't say anything for a few seconds. He was very grave. And he said, but there are even some species of monkeys that are considered human. So everyone got kind of serious and really had to think about that for a while.
I brought Srila Prabhupada a chadar, very similar to this one. And for some reason I didn't want him to know where it came from. I had bought it at Kadigram at the Ashoka Hotel, because Kadi has a branch at the Ashoka Hotel as well. But for some reason I just didn't want him to know that I frequented or that I'd set foot in the Ashoka Hotel. I don't know why to this day. So I took all the tags off and I put it in a brown paper bag, so there was no indication of where it came from. And again, this was at Anandiketan. I brought it up and I put it on his desk and offered my obeisances. And as I was getting up, Srila Prabhupada said, so this is from Ashoka Hotel? So to this day I understand that Prabhupada knows everything, everywhere, at all times. His vision is supernatural. His supernatural vision. But again, one tends to forget that, but it's a very clear indication.
We're in a lounge, as a kind of a separate departure lounge. And Prabhupada asked Jagadish to read from the Bhagavatam. So Jagadish was reading, and Prabhupada went to the back of the room and lay down on one of the benches, seemingly to take a nap. And Jagadish was reading, and Jagadish, he could put an elephant that was charging you to sleep if he wanted to. Sometimes he had a voice like that. So he got through one purport and everyone was out. So he stopped and looked up, and when he stopped, Prabhupada lifted his head and said, I am listening. So Prabhupada was always aware, and he wasn't really sleeping.
We would read Krishna book to him every night, and he would just sit in this really nice ornate rocking chair, and he would sit and rock, and he would just be reading, they'd be reading Krishna book to him, and he would just be massaging his temple and sitting there reading Krishna book, and the story would be finished, and he would just like look up, and they go, chapter 13, Krishna is stealing, Brahma steals the calves, and like, Prabhupada would be like, oh, good, you know, like go on. And this would like be like an hour and a half. We would sit outside, and Prabhupada was just so immersed in Krishna book, and I would be sitting there thinking, does he even know that he wrote this book, you know? It doesn't seem like he's thinking in terms of, there was no ego about this is a book I've written. You know, if I'd have written the book, I would have been like, you know, all proud. But Prabhupada had not the least bit of you know, self-acclaim was not in his vocabulary. He did, you know, it just wasn't part of his personality to take any credit for having written the books. So, being the way I am, I came out one night, and you know, I've always wanted like 20th Century Fox realizations, and so my relationship, I wanted to be special. So and Prabhupada could sense I was real over enthusiastic, to say the least, and I was quite enthusiastic. So one night I came out, and we had just gotten the Sankirtan results back from L.A. And that week, the Denver temple in July of 1975 had come in third in the world. And I was just brimming with pride, wanting to tell Srila Prabhupada, you know. So I went out and I said, Srila, you know, so they got done reading Krishna book, and he stood up to come into the room, back into the house. And I said, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, yes. And I said, last week, Denver was number 3 in the world in book distribution. We were number 3 in the world. And I was thinking he was going to say, way to go, you know, and he just looked around and he looked at me and he said, then you make it number 1. And I went, whoa, I wasn't expecting that, you know. And he just pushed me, you know, he just pushed my button, and I was like, oh man, I had no, you know, I was thinking he was going to say, wow, that is wonderful, you know, because we had done like 3,000 big books, and, you know, we'd done 15,000 points or whatever it was, and L.A. and one other temple were in front of us, Boston or something at that time, or the Radha Damodar party. So it was only the L.A. temple, Radha Damodar party, and then Denver, and we only had 70 devotees, and they had like hundreds and 5 buses, so I thought we were doing dang good. And Srila Prabhupada said, then you make it number 1. And I was like, well, how are we going to do that, you know? But I said, oh, wow, okay, yeah, he's always encouraging us, you know.
Prabhupada said, you have to read my books. If you don't read my books, you're putting your life in danger. You're putting your life in danger. So you must read my books daily. He told the whole public. He told me, especially told to Ati, he was telling to me only. That's Prabhupada. The Prabhupada very well wanted to, everybody should read my books.
Life is in danger.
Yeah. If you don't read, you are putting your life in danger. That's what Prabhupada said.
So Prabhupada was talking to this Indian life member who had just asked, was explaining about her life and how she had a very nice life, very much the motive of goodness. I believe she was a nurse. And Prabhupada explained that material world was like a boil, and that it doesn't do much good to just blow on the boil, that it isn't going to make the boil go away, isn't going to cure the boil needs to be lanced. And so similarly that we need to get to the root of the problem and chant Hare Krishna and get out of this material world and lance our material desires. So he was very, very, very heavy, but expert at preaching.
Srila Prabhupada was walking in St. James's Park, and he was walking and at the same time tapping his cane on the ice which had formed overnight. At one point he asked, what does this mean? And we looked at each other and wondered what we should respond to that. So then Prabhupada asked again, what does this mean? And it was just, we just couldn't fathom what Prabhupada meant. So then suddenly he said, ice is Maya, that the original constitution of water is liquid, and when it comes in contact with freezing weather, it becomes hard and ice. And ice, there is a possibility you can slip. I think that's why Prabhupada was breaking the ice, because he didn't want anyone to slip. And then he went into an analogy. Within that analogy, he then went into explaining that in the same way, the heart has become hard. And just like later today the sun will rise and melt the ice, in the same way, if we continue this chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, then that in itself will soften the heart and reinstate the individual into his natural constitutional position.
We had a program set up on the Mambo Leo show. It was a TV show. So we went to this TV show, and Prabhupada was speaking. We had a big photograph, about maybe 3 feet by 4 foot picture of Lord Chaitanya in the Panchatattva. So the host, he was saying, so who is this personality in the middle? And Prabhupada said, this is Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and he is God. Like that. And the man said, this cannot be God. This is a man. And Prabhupada said, Prabhupada just screamed. He just fired back at him so quickly. Who do you think you're like? Something like, who do you think you are who say he is not God? That he is actually, he's the supreme personality of Godhead. And who are you? And the man got so upset he dropped his pencil and he was just, shaking. Prabhupada just fired back. I guess he thought on a national TV show, Prabhupada, nobody would handle him like that, But Prabhupada, just like a lion, fired back. He's the supreme personality of Godhead. So that was one program we went to.
And then it was a very complex time. I mean, because I was there with Achyutananda, and we just heard how there had been 9 initiations of sannyas in Los Angeles. And, for young brahmacharis, this was like, wow, to become a sannyasi, that was like something really super, really wonderful. I guess you'd say, awesome. And so that was what was really, on my mind, about this taking sannyas and what did it all mean. And then Srila Prabhupada called in Achyutananda in the evening when we already were just taking rest. And I didn't have a clue what sannyas was. And I thought, well, maybe Prabhupada's going to give him sannyas. But instead, Prabhupada was chastising, and I could hear him, really raising his voice. And I said, doesn't sound like he's getting sannyas. And the next thing I knew, I was being called on the carpet. And then Prabhupada was asking me questions, but I didn't understand. He was asking me things which I didn't really know anything about. And then he looked at Devananda, someone was his secretary, I think, at that time. And he kind of looked and he said, no, he doesn't know anything. He's clean. And then Prabhupada called us home and explained that, because right before this there had been this really serious thing that happened in America where in New Vrindavan the 4 sannyasis had declared that Prabhupada was an avatar and that he should, and Prabhupada had to ban them actually, or exile them from ISKCON, because of this situation that was going on. It was very dangerous. And he was very much afraid of that situation. So he explained to us that how this kind of poison of Mayavad had crept into the early ISKCON at that time. He said somebody had written a letter to Achyutananda, one of his, it was Achyutananda wrote to Brahmananda, a letter that Achyutananda had heard from one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, that Prabhupada wasn't actually doing the preaching, that he was just acting as a kind of an extension of Bhakti Siddhanta, like kind of a media, that, but it wasn't actually him that was doing that. It was actually Bhakti Siddhanta who was initiating everybody. Bhakti Siddhanta was doing, Srila Prabhupada, Thakur was doing everything. And Prabhupada was kind of just acting like, nowadays what they call like a riktik. Just like acting like some kind of just not doing anything on his own responsibility. It was actually, everybody is a disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, not a disciple of Prabhupada. So somehow Achyutananda wrote some kind of a letter like that to Brahmananda, what he had heard. And then Brahmananda and the other sannyasis, Prabhupada, so they must have started to speculate that, well, if we're initiated by Prabhupada, we're not Prabhupada's disciple, we're actually Bhakti Siddhanta's disciple. Then, well, we could also be Bhakti Vinod Thakur's disciple, because he's just representing Bhakti Vinod, and if you could be Bhakti Vinod, you could actually be the 6 Goswamis, and if you could be the 6 Goswamis, you could actually be Lord Chaitanya's disciple, and then if you could be Lord Chaitanya's Krishna, then we're Krishna's disciple. And then somehow, in this whole logic, then they came to the conclusion that Prabhupada was actually Krishna, therefore, which was kind of like, I lost the logic there, but that's he said that's how it happens. That actually Achyutananda is innocent. He just kind of transmitted this message. And so the Prabhupada was kind of warning us to be very careful. Any little deviation from the philosophy, any little new kind of introduction, you can create a very huge misconception in the future.
Well, I had to come back one time, a very good quote. I had to come back, I was, Madhavisa, Prabhupada had told Madhavisa, and Madhavisa sent me off to check up on the Hari Bols in the Philippines, and then I had to go to Taiwan, and I had to go on to Hong Kong, and then back to Mayapur to report to Prabhupada, and there was a little bit of checking in there also on Guru Kripa at this time was in Bangkok, and he was getting a little bit wishy-washy, and I had to find some information out. And when I got to Mayapur, I told Prabhupada what I'd found out, and I was once again waiting for Prabhupada to give me some instruction for Guru Kripa, and he said to me, when a cow gives good milk and occasionally she kicks, you do not chastise. I thought that was, probably, I don't know if you've heard that quote, but I've seen a lot of people use that in different situations, but that's where it came from. When a cow gives good milk, occasionally she kicks, you do not chastise.
There was one time when all of the temple presidents were called to Los Angeles. Prabhupada wrote that everyone should come to LA and see how a really good temple was run. And so we didn't, I guess Kirtanananda was the temple president at New Vrindavan at the time, but somehow I was elected to go. And and one of the things that I was supposed to do when I came was to tell Srila Prabhupada about the situation at New Vrindavan, because Hayagriva was, being Hayagriva, and kind of running roughshod over everybody, and everybody was really frustrated with having to deal with him. And so we wanted some kind of official sanction against Hayagriva so that he wouldn't continue to make our lives so miserable. And so I hitchhiked out to Los Angeles, and then it was time for my darshan with Srila Prabhupada, and I was rehearsing this litany of grievances, that we had against Hayagriva, and I was going to make this case. And so when it was time for the darshan, I came in and paid my obeisances, and I was introduced, Prabhupada, this is Ranadhir, and he's from New Vrindavan, and Prabhupada got this look on his face, and he said, "And how is Hayagriva?" And it was just with such love and affection, and there went my whole thing. I couldn't say a word. I could definitely not say a bad word about Hayagriva, and so I remember that's really an example of the spiritual master, not only knowing your mind, but knowing how to change your heart.
When it was time to board the plane, Prabhupada was walking towards the plane, and there was some devotees from a temple in Cleveland, which we used to call Temple Number 2, and it was black body devotees. They had their own temple they started, and they didn't get along with the other temple too well, and didn't get along with GBC too well at the time. But Prabhupada had actually approved that they could have their own temple if they wanted. So one of the ladies from that temple approached Prabhupada and asked him to come visit their temple. And Prabhupada said, "You can come see me at New Vrindavan." So the lady replied, "We don't have any car, Srila Prabhupada." So Prabhupada said, "You can arrange it with your GBC, Jagadish. He'll arrange some transportation for you." So I could see how Prabhupada was trying to bring the whole family together. They were a little bit separate, and Prabhupada wanted the GBC to help them and them to cooperate, with the rest of the movement. It was a nice mood.
But there was one incident that really struck home for me, how Prabhupada was molding us. Like we sing in the Guru Puj that your mercy is all I'm made of. And that is factually or experienced when we were in India, and Kirtanananda had been sent to Gorakhpur for some preaching work. And I think he was staying at the house of a devotee named Ramananda. He was a professor at the university. But Kirtanananda had no liking for India. In fact, he actually had a very negative attitude, and he just wanted to go back, thought it was a useless waste of time. And at one point he wrote a letter to Prabhupada in this spirit of complaining and just wanting to go. After I finished relating the contents of the letter to Prabhupada, Prabhupada said, "Write him an encouraging letter. Encourage him." So I also wasn't that fond of Kirtanananda, and it was just as soon that he go back to America. But since I was the secretary of Prabhupada, it was my duty to carry out Prabhupada's order. So when I went to my room, I sat, and I had to think, what would Prabhupada say? How would he couch those words in order to bring about this enthusiasm in his disciple Kirtanananda, so that he would feel that enthusiasm and encouragement and determination to stay. So sitting like that and meditating like that, I finally formulated a letter, and then the letter was sent off, and within a week or so or two, we got a response, and Kirtanananda was completely transformed. He was just totally enlivened because of this letter that he had received from the Swami, or Srila Prabhupada. So from that I could understand that we were being trained to act and to speak and to think in the spirit of Srila Prabhupada. This is how the disciples are an extension of the mercy of the spiritual master. At least that is my understanding, that your mercy is all that I'm made of. And this is factually true, that the devotees are, now we have the cell phone technology, so when we speak something here, it goes to a relay station, and relay. You can in fact call anyone in any part of the world because the relay is set up so perfectly, so transparent. And that is how we're seeing the Krishna consciousness movement expand. By Prabhupada has transmitted the original transcendental message, and it has been received and then relayed by his disciples. And in that process, we're purified and we are trained and formed up. And in fact, we're all little Prabhupada clones, so to speak. Although at the same time, every one of us is an individual person with unique characteristics and qualifications and relationship with Srila Prabhupada. It's not that we're all mindless followers, but so that was a deep lesson for me, that letter writing.
So Brahmananda had given me the kind of the instruction to be the pujari, which I had no idea how to deal with deities. All I knew is that Shilavati was supposed to be the best, one to know how to serve and make, arrangements for the deity. I was in LA and she was there. And so Brahmananda had told me that he wanted me to take care of these deities, the Radha Krishna deities that someone had loaned us, one of the life members. And so we just had a platform in the room there, and the deities were there, and we just offered flowers every day. So what happened was that I'm cleaning the altar, cleaning the flowers off the altar. So Radha and Krishna are here, and I'm thinking, well, I have to move the deities. Maybe I should put Krishna on. I cleaned all around. Maybe I should put Krishna this side and Radharani on this side. So I put Krishna on this side. I put Radharani on this side. I'm cleaning the altar. And I'm taking the flowers out. And Bhagavat comes in and yelling at me and says, Brahmananda says, you got to get in the van now. We got to go to the festival. Says, he wants you in the car right now. So I'm thinking, okay, I've thrown the flowers away, and I forgot that I left the deities like that. So we come back from the festival. Prabhupada goes into the room, yeah. So Bhagavat comes to get me, and he says, Prabhupada wants to see you. He said he wants to know why the deities are a mile apart. He said, I said, I don't know, but Bhuta Bhavana might know. So he said, he told me to come and get you. So I went back to the altar in the room there, and Prabhupada looks at me and he says, why are the deities like this? They are a mile apart. He says, Radha and Krishna are never separated. Why are they like that? And I said, well, I was trying to make an excuse. I said, well, Srila Prabhupada Brahmananda was telling me I had to go. And before I could finish the sentence, he said, so does that mean they should be thrown in the street? Like that. And I was just so devastated I couldn't say anything. So I was just in shock, and Prabhupada said, should they be thrown in the street? And it's just like time just stood still. I just couldn't say anything,
Oh yeah, Kenny was protecting his Krishna.
Yeah.
It wasn't you.
Yeah, well, of course I took it that it was me. And so then he just put on a broad smile, just like that. He put on a broad smile as if to say, you fool, all right. Put them together. He said, put them together. Radha and Krishna are never separated. And he said, and do it nicely. And that was the end of it. I mean, I thought that I was in a hole that I would never be able to get out. And Prabhupada just relieved it all just like that.
I think Prabhupada was leaving, and Malati was there, so Prabhupada stopped in front of Malati, and Prabhupada asked Malati, where's Shyamsundar? or how is Shamasundar? And Malati said, oh, Prabhupada, he's having difficulty, and he's gone off, and he's doing this and doing that, and she was in anxiety, and Prabhupada was very, very concerned. Prabhupada, was almost hurt. And Prabhupada said, he's engaged in so much monkey business. He was surprised. Surprised and hurt was the feeling that I got. But Prabhupada said, what's done is done. You tell him he should come back. And 3 times Prabhupada said that to her, that what's done is done. You just tell him that he should come back. So just this overwhelming sense of compassion is the feeling that I got, that Prabhupada was really, really concerned about his devotees, wanted them to, be happy and comfortable in spiritual life.
I remember one time he got a letter about a devotee, I think it was in Australia, who had a problem and was asked to leave the temple, and then Prabhupada was crying. He said that this devotee had done so much service that should go and fall at his feet, beg him to come back, beg him to take up Krishna consciousness again. Why are you throwing him away? At least beg him 3 times, falling at his feet, begging him. After 3 times if you beg him and he still doesn't come, well then what can you do? So Prabhupada was so much concerned about every devotee, that everyone be treated very nice, and people be given every opportunity to try to remain in Krishna consciousness. Of course, at the same time, if they were preaching Mayavad or something, then he had to take a very strong action to protect the others.
This was in Vrindavan, and we were going to the holy places. And on the way back, the bus broke down. So it was all women. And we weren't concerned, we were feeling very, very protected. But later on we heard that Srila Prabhupada was very concerned. He was very worried about us. And he kept on asking, where are the women? Where are the women? He didn't go to sleep until we returned. And he had also commented, he said that he was worried that after he left that the women would not be protected. So I thought that was very significant, that Prabhupada was so concerned about us and worried about, the fate of the women when he was gone. That really touched, really touched my heart.
As I said, I was only 15 then, and I was 15 when I joined the temple. And what happened was I was one of the kids who decided they would run away from home to join the temple. And so circumstances were such that I was convinced that this was the right thing to do. And the devotees were urging me. Well, some devotees were saying, yeah, just come and join the temple. This was in London. Some devotees were saying, we'll take you to New York or something. And other devotees were saying, well, it might not be such a good idea. So I was a bit confused. And someone suggested, why don't you write to Srila Prabhupada and ask him? So I did. I wrote to Prabhupada and asked him. I told him I'd really like to leave home, run away from home, but I'm underage. My parents are a real obstacle to my Krishna consciousness. I'm not happy, like that. Well, I sent the letter off, and things got really bad at home, and I was young and impulsive, and I felt I couldn't wait. I didn't know if I'd even get a reply from Prabhupada. So I decided I was going to run away. And I had this idea in my mind, because I was so materially attached, that I would take some of my material belongings along with me to the temple. I didn't have it thought out very well. I wasn't very experienced. I didn't think what the outcomes would be or anything. So anyway, I packed a box full of things, and one of the things was my tape recorder. And at something like 3 o'clock in the morning, I started sneaking down the stairs with this big cardboard box on my shoulder. And my parents knew something was up. So my father heard the stairs creaking, I guess, and he opened the door to his bedroom and started chasing me down the stairs. He was furious. And so I turned around with this cardboard box, this huge cardboard box, and I threw it onto the staircase between him and me. And when I threw it, the tape recorder inside, which had a tape of Srila Prabhupada in it, went off. It pressed the start button, and the volume was really high. And Prabhupada came out chanting. It was that one with the Hare Krishna mantra, and it's really fast and really loud, and it was going, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And it just became so dramatic, you know. And I just ran down the stairs, and I felt like Prabhupada was speeding me on, you know. And I opened the front door. Somehow or other, the front door was not locked, so I managed to open the door, and I left the house, and it was pitch black outside, 3 o'clock in the morning. All I didn't have any of my material possessions. I just had the clothes on my back. Didn't even have any money. And somehow I managed to get into London, and I just threw myself on the mercy of the devotees in London, and they helped me. But I really felt Prabhupada's presence there. But then the unfortunate thing was that after being in the temple for 3 months, by this time I was in Germany, I got a reply from Srila Prabhupada. And the reply, as you might imagine, said not to run away from home. And he said that there's no material impediment to Krishna consciousness. And he said, just like Prahlad Maharaj, he had a demoniac father, and he did so many abusive things to him, but still Prahlad was not stopped from being a pure devotee. So he said, stay at home, finish school, and then you'll have so many skills that you can use in Krishna's service. So when I got that letter, I felt really crushed. You know, I felt like I'd really blown it big time, and I was embarrassed and ashamed. And anyway, such was my false ego. I couldn't take an instruction from my spiritual master in the right spirit. But I just anyway, I wanted to tell people about the letter just so that others can benefit from the instruction that Prabhupada gave, even though perhaps I didn't. But I figured, you know, that Krishna must have had some hand in everything that happened, and things turned out for the best. If I hadn't joined the temple when I did, I wouldn't have been initiated by Srila Prabhupada, perhaps, because by the time I turned 18, who knows, Prabhupada might not have been around.
You know, I got to go on a morning walk in Denver, and Brahmananda and all these sannyasis were on this walk, and it was so much fun. This was probably more fun than I ever had, was to be able to go on the morning walk. And Prabhupada was talking about Brahmananda's mother, and Vishnu Janana Maharaj said, or Prabhupada said, this was during the time when Ted, whatever his name was doing the deprogramming of the devotees, and they were talking about that a little bit, and Prabhupada said, yes, because your parents, they do not like me. And Vishnu Janana Maharaj says, yes, Srila Prabhupada, you are like Narada Muni. You have to keep moving, huh? And he said, yes, that is why I travel so much, so they cannot catch up to me. And everybody started laughing. And he said, but some of your parents, you know, they've appreciated. And he said, when he pointed to Brahmananda, and he said, how about your mother? Tell them about your mother. And Brahmananda like started giggling, you know, and he's like, and he goes, and he couldn't say anything, so Prabhupada picked up on it, and he said, his mother, she came to see me, and she said to me, I have given you my 2 sons. You have taken them and you've turned them into monks. They have their heads shaved, they wear these robes. What else do you want? And he said, and so I said to her, can you give some money? And she went, oh no, yeah. And he said, and just to have a laugh like that, like with all these swamis, that's probably the best laugh I've ever had in my life. You know, to be standing there with all these sannyasis and Srila Prabhupada having a laugh about our parents being upset about him taking their children away from them, you know. And you know, I really understood at that point that he was my father. You know, he was my real true father, and the family thing was like, and that was just a temporary thing. But that Srila Prabhupada was actually our father, and he was here to come and gather up his kids and get them out on the road and get them in vans and get them in, you know, wherever they were going and get them on, you know, tirtha and pilgrimage and going from one temple to the next and distributing his books.
My father was a demon, you could say, in the early days. He used to pay guys to disrupt the Sankirtan party and rough up the guys a little. And Prabhupada was staying in Australia, and my father was very envious that he thought that Srila Prabhupada was, you know, sitting on the couch that he'd given us and using the bed or using the dining. He didn't know that everything had been taken out. But he was envious, and he rang me up one day while Prabhupada was there and said that he's going to come down and disrupt the whole occasion of Srila Prabhupada being there. And I said to my father before he left, I said, well, before you leave and come down here, best you ring an ambulance, because they'll need one to take you away. And I went straight in to tell Srila Prabhupada what had gone on. I told Prabhupada that he was one of the guys that, you know, used to get people to disrupt the Sankirtan party in the city, and I was hoping Prabhupada would give me instruction that I could do something, you know. And Prabhupada very severely lectured me. No, he said, no, this is your responsibility in this life and in your next life. It is your responsibility for your parents. You have to get them out of this hellish situation, this life and in their next life. And told me that I had to do the Sankara performances at their funerals, which I did. And he told me that day, he said, you start mending this situation right now, which I did. And I didn't like it, but I thought, okay, well, Srila Prabhupada said this is what I got to do, then that's what I got to do.
Prabhupada wrote in a letter to Vasudev that prasad distribution will make Fiji successful. So Vasudeva was thinking, how can we distribute much prasad? Then he thought that it's better we open a restaurant.
Name Hare Krishna.
And name of the restaurant was Hare Krishna restaurant. So he opened a vegetarian restaurant. And when we were opening a vegetarian restaurant, all the people said, you opening, all the business people, and they said that you opening vegetarian restaurant, who will come to eat there? Grass. Who will eat grass? But when we opened, it was very successful. All the embassy people, you know, Australian embassy, European, English people, and from British embassy, from Australian embassy, New Zealand embassy, French embassy, all the people were coming in the restaurant for
very nice, very clean
lunch. And they said, we didn't know that vegetarian food, we can get so much varieties. We thought only cut vegetable and boil it, that is vegetarian food. We didn't know. And all the public became more favorable to Krishna conscious movement after the restaurant we opened. We were running 2 restaurants before, but now we have 5 restaurants, Hare Krishna restaurants in Fiji.
I remember one experience where an Indian gentleman gave Srila Prabhupada probably quite a large donation. You could see him getting ready to give it, and he was really excited about giving the donation. And finally, you know, there was the right time, so he went up and he gave Prabhupada the donation. Prabhupada thanked him, and then Prabhupada kind of stopped everything. He got out his keys, opened up his drawer, put the donation inside the drawer, locked the door, and then went on with it. So it really impressed me how, part of spirituality is practicality and taking care of everything. Prabhupada was very careful with money, and that time was no exception.
There's another incident in Detroit. At the time, they had just gotten the Fisher Mansion. A gentleman came that obviously mixed in the higher society of Detroit. And he came to see Prabhupada, and he was telling Prabhupada a bit of the history of the building, a bit of the history of the auto industry. And I was sitting in the room, and I was waiting for Prabhupada to preach to this gentleman. And I kept expecting Prabhupada to say something and to preach something Krishna conscious. Prabhupada never did. Prabhupada was very polite, spoke a few words here and there, and he just listened to the gentleman speak. And he never preached to him at all. And after the interview, I realized how Prabhupada was expert. And because this gentleman didn't really want to hear anything spiritual. He wasn't interested in anything spiritual. But he liked to meet famous people. And Prabhupada picked up on that. And he met Prabhupada, and he was very happy to meet Prabhupada. But he wasn't interested in anything spiritual, and Prabhupada didn't really waste his time preaching to him.
I was thinking, well, I went on a morning walk and I asked him, well, Srila Prabhupada, I approach a lot of these people on the level of business. I'm not approaching them on books. They're not just taking a book. I said, I approach them for business. And do they gain anything when they just give Krishna money and not know that they're actually giving money to Krishna or surrendering some money to Krishna, And he said, this is called Ajnana Sukriti. And I thought, oh yeah, Ajnana, without knowledge. Oh, Sukriti is like, some potency. So I could kind of like, And he said, they make some advancement. No, unknowingly, they can make some advancement. And that gave me so much, that reassured me that what I was doing for him, even though it wasn't, what really got him going, was something that was important and that actually there was some benefit to, because the hype behind the book distribution was Prabhupada's love, and that's what, he was here to bring his books here. And it took it was the frontline activity that took so much backup work to be able to have it go on. And it was just real nice to know that there were other things that we could be doing to support that gave credence to what we were doing as far as passing out his books. So that gave me a lot of pleasure to know that even without their knowledge, they were gaining some potency.
As far as the brahmachari is concerned, I was in Maya, and I had friends in the advertising industry, and they came to me one particular day to the temple and said, look, we've got an idea for doing an ad for Wrangler jeans. The Wrangler company? They're paying us this amount of money. They want us to come up with some sort of program, advertising release for Wrangler. I said, yes. And they said, well, we've got this idea that we could use the Hare Krishnas in a Sankirtan party, Madanga, Kartal, Hari Sori's in it. And what we're going to do is we're going to dress one of the devotees in a Wrangler denim shirt with a dhoti on, everyone else in dhoti, full tilak, Madanga, full kirtan, coming down Burke Street, and it's going to say on top of the photo, I ain't going unless I wear my Wrangler shirt. And I spoke to Madhavisa about it. Madhavisa said, oh, that's terrific, let's go ahead with it. So these guys being friends, I went to the guys, I said, we're happy with that. How much are you going to pay us? I will give you this amount of dollars. And I've gone back to Madhavisa and I said, this amount of dollars. She said, oh, okay. So we get rolling, and then 2 days later we do a little bit more work down the track, and Madhavisa says, get more money. So I go back and I go, well, I know sorry, but we need more money. And they go, okay, they'll okay that. And as we got further into it, I go, more money. Every day I went to more money, more money, more money, which we did. We got more money, more money. The advertising agents told me at the time, at the completion of the ad, I went and got paid in cash. They've never done this before. They string everyone out to 120 days, etc., etc. But the ad was hugely successful. It won awards all around the world. There was even devotees up on the podium last night that said they saw it in London. I had other people around the world said that they saw the ad. So billboards, 40 feet by 20 feet, all around the world with this Wrangler ad, I ain't going unless I wear my Wrangler shirt. I'm getting harassed by brahmacharis because I'm the only householder. I'm always in Maya. This is not what Prabhupada wanted. Prabhupada wanted us to to sell books, not do stuff like this. So one particular day on a drive, I've got the Prabhupada's rung the bell, let's go for a drive. I've gone, yes, Prabhupada. So we're out and we're driving through the suburbs, and I took the opportunity to come back in through the city where I knew one of these ads were. And we'd been discussing so many things during the hour or two. And I come in through the city and I park right underneath this big billboard, which was on this building, which is called Maya. Ironic, but that's what it's called, Maya. And it's still called Maya, and it's a huge network of shopping centres and things now in Melbourne. And I sat there for a while, and Prabhupada's chanting and looking around, and I said, well, Prabhupada, I said, what do you think of that ad there? And Prabhupada looked at it for a long, long while, and he said, he said, the boy who did this is very intelligent. And I've sat there looking, and then he goes, so, it is you. And I said, yes, Prabhupada, so that is very good. So I was straight back to where all the listen, you guys, don't you give me any of this stuff anymore. You have no idea what you're talking about. Prabhupada thought that was fantastic. Shut up. But that was the mood of the brahmacharis then, you know. If you weren't in orange, you're in Maya. So that was particularly nice for me.
That's what I like. See, I want to bring Prabhupada in there.
That was particularly nice for me.
The button is the conclusion.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was nice.
So I felt
You're vindicated.
I felt 20 feet tall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And I could go back and rough these guys up a little.
Prabhupada never used to criticize anyone. He never criticized. I asked one time something, I think, to him, and he didn't answer anything. I asked him something about
some devotees.
Some devotees about, and he didn't answer anything. He devotee was gone out and fall down, something happened, and I asked Prabhupada. Prabhupada never answered anything.
So that was very good quality of Prabhupada.
I never had Prabhupada criticize. I had so many times association, but Prabhupada never criticized any time any devotee. Any devotee. He loves his devotees, all devotees.
Another time in that same room, there was a discussion about the kirtans, the Radha Damodar kirtans that we were having on campus or on the street where we'd set up. And Prabhupada was saying we just should use kol and kartals. And at that time we had many instruments. We had harmonium, we had esraj, which was like a violin, we had ektar, and we had an instrument that had strings and you'd play it with little hammers. So there was a discussion where Prabhupada was saying, just use kol and kartals. And Adikeshwara said that the people were attracted to the party because of the instruments. And Prabhupada didn't seem to take that very seriously. And then Adikeshwara said, but Vishnu Jan said, and Prabhupada cut him off, and said, who is Vishnu Jan? I am your spiritual master. And also in that meeting, Prabhupada said there shouldn't be any harmonium during the artis. Previously, you hear a lot of tapes, Bhardaraj and others playing harmonium, so that was stopped during artis. And it didn't seem like Prabhupada just wanted some expert musicians, he wanted devotees. So that was stopped, and at that time the Radha Damodar party just went back to mridanga and kartals on the public kirtans for a while, and eventually we added a couple instruments here and there. I had heard with Prabhupada's permission. I don't know for sure.
We were really getting good at plays, or I don't know if we were getting good, but we were having a lot of fun with plays in Denver. We did the Contemplation of the Objects of the Senses play, and we were contemplating doing that play for Srila Prabhupada when he came. And but it had like attachment and lust and delusion, and we played it up, and we had Mick Jagger in the background, and I was attachment, and I took the gloves off, and you were anger with the little Crota-looking, red outfit, and at that point, a couple of members of our cast were no longer at the temple there. Maitreya and Indra had left, and so we had to come up with another play, and so we decided to do Pondraka, and just freaking puffed up, Pondraka, and so we had a new devotee who was really excited, Govardhana Dari. I can't remember exactly what he was in the play or who he was, but all I can remember is they made me Pondraka. And so we were across the street, and we were all getting made up, and I had to walk across the street with a four-arm form, and I had like these shoulder pad things built up with these two arms going up this way, and my other arms coming down this way. And I had this headdress and everything, and Prabhupada was on the Vyasasana, and they said, and yes, and Krishna was there at this sacrifice, and Pondraka came in and arose and said, you impudent fool. Or they said, and Pondraka came in, and then, so I walk in the temple room, in the Denver temple, and Prabhupada's like in front of me, and I came walking by him, and walking by everybody, and I look over at Prabhupada, and I was, I had to do it. I was in the play, I'm thinking, oh, I hope he forgives me for this, And I walk in, and I have a forearm for him, and I look over at him, and I say, where is this Krishna? And he looked at me, and Prabhupada was into it. He looked at me like, if he could have, I don't know, he was into it. He was ready to jump up and kill me himself. He was so into it. He was like looking at me like, and I go, who is this Krishna? And he looked at me like, he was like, I'm one of Krishna's guys, and I was like, whoa. And I just I stopped in my tracks for a second, took a breath, and I said, this impudent fool, who does he? He goes, he is not the only one that has a forearm for him. He is not the only one. Yada, 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 da, da, da. And so, anyhow, Krishna came. I think Govardhana Dari was Krishna. And he came and he killed me. But when he killed me, what happened is we had these little pyrotechnic, little firework things that just blew up. Like when he killed me, I fell down and my arms kind of fell off, and I was laying there, and this explosion happened, and it went boom, and this big mushroom cloud of smoke arose in the temple, and I didn't even know it was going to be this loud. It startled everybody, I mean, it was just like, a big explosion in the temple room, come on. And Prabhupada went, and he kind of and he broke into a big smile, and I was like, oh, good, he liked it. Wow, this is really, to me it was like, what young boy doesn't like an explosion? It's like, all right, we got the pyrotechnics here. So that was really exciting. That was really fun. And I think the biggest thing that Prabhupada taught me was that there's this very serious side to Krishna consciousness, but there's certainly a heck of a lot of fun.
One time we were at a gathering, and I was sitting right here because I could have been reading the Shastras, but I like to watch Prabhupada because watching Prabhupada was the practical application of Krishna consciousness. And so I was always staying with him as much as I could, anytime, any excuse. At first they used to say, don't let Gurudas in because he's always there. So a big line of people were there and giving Prabhupada presents and enthusiastic and getting his darshan. And Prabhupada turned to me and said, just see how they're treating saintly people. And he didn't use his name, he just said saintly people like that. And then he told me that sometimes, that if someone, because people were touching his feet, that if someone touches a person's feet, a guru's feet, a sadhu's feet, they have to be able to absorb all the karma of that person. And he said, and so that's why I was here. He said, and that's why I'm patting them on their head so I can give them their karma back.
Oh, one thing that happened in Detroit, there was a tall black fellow that had been coming to the Sunday feast in Detroit, and the temple had sort of thrown him out because they said he was bothering some of the ladies that were coming to the Sunday feast. So our party, anybody that wanted to come on, they'd come on no matter how crazy they were. So we asked this guy, come on with us. So he joined our bus, and I went, he lived in a very poor part of town, and I went and got some of his belongings. He had an old guitar and some clothes, and it was a really run-down apartment that he lived in. So we were following Prabhupada, so he joined the bus, and we drove to Toronto, where that was Prabhupada's next stop. And we parked, Prabhupada was around the corner in a house from the temple, and we parked one driveway up. And if I was sitting in the driver's seat, sometimes I could see Prabhupada coming from his house, like that. So one time, I was sitting in the driver's seat, and Prabhupada and some devotees came out of the house, and one Indian-bodied devotee dove at Prabhupada's feet. And within the blink of an eye, Prabhupada put his cane like this, and that devotee's head stopped at the cane, and his hands missed Prabhupada's feet. Later on, he let him touch his feet, but at that time, he stopped it on the spot. And he walked by the bus to go to the temple, and he noticed that one of the bus bays had been pushed in. Some drunken driver had smashed into it about a week ago. We hadn't got it fixed. So Prabhupada admonished, said you should get it fixed right away, and the bus should always look first class. And he also told us we should keep it very, very clean. So from then on, almost every day I would wash it, keep it nice and clean. And our deities were Gaurnitai, with Gaurnitai deities, brass. And Lord Nityananda was particularly beautiful. Although all the deities on the Radha Damodar party were bought from the same place, they all looked different. And our Lord Nityananda was particularly beautiful. So Prabhupada walked by one morning, and he stood on his tiptoes and looked in the window. And later on he said, I've seen your Gaurnitai. I've seen your Lord Nityananda. He is very beautiful. Everyone on this bus is going back to Godhead. He didn't say when. Then years later, I was visiting the Detroit temple, which was now the Fisher Mansion. And there was that devotee that we had thrown off. We had actually had to throw him off later too, because he was really a wild guy. There he was, Dhoti Kurta, first class. He was a temple guard. He was doing a lot of service. And the minute I saw him, I remember that quote where Prabhupada said, we're going back to Godhead.
This was told to me by one brahmachari who, when Srila Prabhupada was leaving, he came with his guru, and he had seen Srila Prabhupada a few times when he was a young boy in Bengal, and Prabhupada had asked him if he would help him by helping to train up his young boys, his young disciples. But he was pretty young himself at that time, didn't speak English, and he was terrified of the Western devotees because people had said that we were CIA and we would kidnap them and make them marry an American girl or something. So he was frightened, but he said that he always remembered that instruction. And then he said that when Srila Prabhupada was leaving, he was sitting in the room, and Srila Prabhupada was just lying on his bed. He wasn't saying anything. And he said he was sitting there and he was praying to Srila Prabhupada. Oh, Srila Prabhupada, I know that you're fulfilling the order of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and I want to help and I've never been able to do it, and I'm so sorry. And he was lamenting like that in his heart. But he said he also had some really deep questions about the holy name. And I think this is a brahmachari who had been chanting 64 rounds for about 15 years. I don't know what questions he could have had, but he had some, and they were in his heart, and he was sitting there. And he said that all of a sudden the servant and whoever else was there went out of the room, and he was just alone with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada was lying on the bed. And he kind of looked at him, and he saw that Srila Prabhupada had one eye open. And with that eye, he went like this. So he kind of was so nervous, but he scooted over, and Prabhupada kept going like this, come closer. And finally, he got right next to Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada put his mouth right by his ear. And he said in the most amazing way, Srila Prabhupada chanted the Mahamantra into his ear. And he said that when the Mahamantra went into his ear, just like a waterfall flowing into his heart, every answer to every question and 1,000 more came into his heart. He had never experienced anything like that meaning of the holy name that Prabhupada was giving him. And then he said he looked at Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada just looked at him with the one eye, and then he just closed his eye.
A couple of brothers, some Brahmins who were engaged in Hyderabad when the temple was first set up, the deities were installed. South Indian Brahmins, and Srila Prabhupada had told Yashodananda and Achyutananda Swamis to treat them very nicely because they're real Brahmins. Give them anything they want. So in 1977, early in 1977 is when the murti of Srila Prabhupada was first made. And what is unusual about this is that generally when the spiritual master is on the planet, you don't install his murti in the temple because everybody comes. I was in Vrindavan at the time, and so many people, I'm sure today, same experiences there, they will come up and they feel they're meeting Srila Prabhupada, that he's sitting on the Vyasa-san, as he truly is. In Vrindavan, sometimes we would see people talk to him, say prayers, bow down to him, and realize then, oh my goodness, this is the murti of Srila Prabhupada. But Sampat Kumar Bhattacharya, when he heard that this was taking place, that Srila Prabhupada's murti was going to be installed in Bombay and Vrindavan and so many different temples around the world, at his personal expense, he traveled from Hyderabad, from South India to Bombay, and he wanted to communicate to Srila Prabhupada the Shastric evidence that this is not encouraged at all. Why? Because everybody will come to worship you, they will touch your lotus feet, the murti's lotus feet. In this way, you will take on so much karma from the people, and you will have to suffer for this. And he gave so many Shastric references, gave it his best, and this was a learned Brahmin. He gave quite a presentation. It was out of affection for Srila Prabhupada. He was really wanting to do him service in this way. And after Prabhupada patiently listened to him, he finally said, "Don't you understand? That's why I've come." And when Bhattacharya heard this, he immediately stopped, folded his hands, circumambulated Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada 3 times, and then he left. He finally got who Srila Prabhupada was.
I don't know if my husband told this story, but when Srila Prabhupada used to leave LA, afterwards people like Ujjwala and some of the ladies who were in charge of the cleaning, they used to go around really fast and gather up any kind of nectar there was, and then they would give out little pieces to some people. And so one time, she gave a little notebook to Gopa, Vrindapal Prabhu, and we had that notebook for many years after we were married, and we just thought it was empty. And on the front of it, it just said Hong Kong Hilton. And for some reason, it must have been Yogamaya or something. We never looked that carefully into that notebook, and one day, we opened it up. We were clearing through all of the Prabhupada nectar that we had and putting it into a little sacred box. And all of a sudden, Gopa goes, "Oh, look!" And there was this one little page near the back, and on that page, it was very amazing. Srila Prabhupada had a phone number and a couple other things, and then it looked like he was kind of doodling, but transcendentally doodling, I don't know, but he wrote 2 times in this very beautiful script, kind of like how he signed his name, but even more ornate. And at first we were looking like, what does it say? And then we suddenly saw it clear, and it was 2 lines of the same thing. And what it said was, save the world from godlessness. So that's a treasure.